It took me until my early 40s, when I was playing roller derby, to realize that I guess I'm kind of a jock. I had never thought about myself that way, or even thought of myself as athletic at all, even though in retrospect I played t-ball, softball, gymnastics, soccer, field hockey, rugby, swim team, rode horses, took karate, and even more at various times while I was growing up. The reason I never thought of myself as athletic was because in elementary school in the 1980s, I was terrible at the annual Presidential Fitness Awards. You know, if you grew up in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, you may remember this torture. Every year in PE, we were evaluated on how many pull-ups and sit-ups we could do, how far we could jump, timed in a shuttle run and a 50-yard dash, and the most dreaded, from my perspective, the 600-yard walk run. And then we were rated based on our scores. If they were good enough, we would get one of 3 different tiers of medals as an award. I never got even the lowest tier. That cemented my understanding of myself as slow, unathletic, and clumsy. Honestly, I don't think we realize how deeply we impact our children's self-identity at such an early age and how difficult it can be to overcome. But back to that 600-yard walk run. 600 yards is just over 1/3 of a mile. Today, I sort of laugh at how short that distance is, but to me, it felt like a marathon. I hate running. I have always hated running. I have done a half marathon, and I've done some small triathlons, and I hated the running part of all of them, except for the last 30 seconds. I know some of you love it, no shade at all. Actually, I'm a bit envious that you can just get out there and do something that you love with no equipment. Just go and do it. But anyway, I have never liked running. And to get through these 600 yards, I would use all sorts of mental devices. And that would get me through what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 15 minutes. Or maybe 10. One technique I often used was to pretend that I was Spider-Man on a skateboard. And I would shoot out webs to various trees and light posts along the way, and then pull myself on my skateboard. And I literally would do this while I was running to pull myself along. And I know that I looked strange, but whatever. It got me through. Another technique I used was to imagine that I was fast-forwarding, like the new VCR that my family had. I would just pretend I was fast-forwarding through the run, and that soon enough I would be at the end of agony. I would imagine being done, getting on with my day, having fast-forwarded through the rough spot. I think we all feel that way sometimes. When we don't like what we're going through, and we just wish we were at the end of it. Wouldn't it have been great if we could have just fast-forwarded through to the end of the pandemic? Or if we could fast-forward, maybe some of you are hoping we could fast-forward through the end of this interim period. Or to fast-forward through to Christmas already, if Christmas is a time that you love. Or through a degree program that you're doing. Or through chemotherapy. Or through waiting for a diagnosis. We often wish we could just fast-forward through when we feel stuck in situations that just feel like they are dragging on and on and on. We human beings, we are very creative when it comes to avoiding pain and suffering. We have various techniques, both healthy and not healthy, for trying to get through these slogs. We retreat into books or Netflix. We self-medicate with various mood-altering substances. We pretend we are fine even when we aren't. But the thing is, we know deep in our hearts that the only way we will get out of most of these slogs is by going through them. The only way out is through. Now, this phrase, the only way out is through, comes from a Robert Frost poem entitled Servant of Servants. It's a very long poem, and it contains the stream of consciousness thoughts of a lonely, overworked New England housewife who tends the farm for her husband and his workers. In the poem, there's a man named Len who has moved to the woods and lives by himself. Here is an excerpt from the poem, and remember, this is told from the housewife's point of view. It's rest I want. There, I have set it out. From cooking meals for hungry hired men and washing dishes after them, for doing things over and over that just won't stay done. By good rights, I ought to not have so much put upon me. There seems no other way. Len says one steady pull ought to do it. He says the best way out is always through, and I agree to that. Or, insofar that I can see no way out but through, leastways for me. And then they'll be convinced. Did you catch that? Len, the guy who lives by himself and has no responsibilities, is basically using this phrase, the best way out is always through, to keep this frustrated woman in her place. This frustrated woman who sees no way out except death. That'll show them. As demonstrated in this poem, that phrase, the only way out is through, has often been used to keep people in their place, like this farm wife. That was her role, right? She should just get through it. But that is absolutely not how I am talking about this phrase today. There are some things to which we should never become reconciled to, that we should never just shrug our shoulders and accept, like an abusive spouse or a toxic work environment. And Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us we should never become adjusted to segregation, discrimination, religious bigotry, and so much more. So when I say that the only way out is through, I am not talking about situations like this as much as I am talking about emotions. I am talking about how the only way to get through our feelings is to allow ourselves to feel them and work through them. So often we want to take uncomfortable emotions and just fast forward or put them in a box. Heck, I have a very secure padlocked box in my heart that I have been known to put powerfully uncomfortable emotions into. I'm sure some of you have a similar padlocked box. But then they just stay there, festering, leaking their toxicity into every aspect of our lives. And then, when we do that, they tend to come out sideways. Oh, beloveds, we all know how this works, right? We get a diagnosis and are afraid, and so we take it out on the medical office receptionist. Or we experience micro or macro aggressions at work and come home and take our anger and frustration out on our kids. Or we are sad, grieving the loss of the way things used to be at home, at work, at church, and we take it out on other people. What I find fascinating is that it turns out if we let ourselves feel the feelings, if we process them, if we work through them, it turns out we can actually dramatically change the situation that is causing the feelings because we have allowed ourselves to experience the growth that comes from processing our emotions. We can be transformed when we allow ourselves to feel. A friend of mine talks about this when she talks about her divorce, how for years she felt alone, isolated, frustrated, ignored. But she kept trying to convince herself that it was fine, she was fine, he'll change. It wasn't until she actually began to allow herself to experience her feelings as valid that she found the inner strength to change the situation. When we allow ourselves to feel, we open ourselves up to transformation. And when we open ourselves up to transformation, we can change the situation around us. Of course, there are some situations we can't change, like the pandemic, but we can change our relationship to what is happening around us when we allow ourselves to acknowledge what we feel about it, when we allow ourselves to process our feelings. In 2018, Dr. Gail Gross published a book with grief, and this was the title, The Only Way Out is Through. After the sudden death of her adult daughter in 1990, Gross dove into studying family development and human behavior and got several advanced degrees as a part of her grieving process. Now an expert on the subject matter, Dr. Gross writes that what she ultimately discovered is that if you allow yourself to have your grief rather than to resist it, then acceptance, personal reconstruction, and restoration are possible. Your life, she says, though forever changed, can become even more vital than before. So often, though, we are like the little tree in our Words for All Ages. We just want to hold on to what we have. We don't know. It's scary, especially if losing our leaves means we're going to get cold or if we're going to suffer. But the only way to grow is to let go. Let go of pretending everything is okay. Let go of wanting to fast forward through uncomfortable emotions. Let go and maybe, just maybe, allow our lives to become even more vital, to be transformed. The little tree was unable to grow, unable to reach its potential until it had worked through its fear of being cold, its fear and sadness of losing its leaves, its worry about what came next. But when it did work through those feelings, it found itself stronger and more courageous, transformed, and ready for what was next. It was still scared, but it had processed them. When we accept our feelings and allow ourselves to work through them, this can be the source of clarity in our new way of being, and it can give us the power we need to move in that direction. Ignoring the pandemic and our feelings about it did not make it go away. Convincing ourselves that everything is fine at work or at home when it clearly is not will not make the situation better. We can't fast forward through this interim period at this congregation. And if we put our feelings about difficult matters into a box and lock them away, we deny ourselves the opportunities for growth that can come if we instead allow ourselves to sit with and work through and process our uncomfortable feelings. Yes, sometimes it's a slog. Yes. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it's scary, and frankly, sometimes it just really sucks. We often don't know where we're going or where we're going to end up or what's going to happen. In so many ways, we may find ourselves on a threshold facing an unknown future. But we'll get there, even if the road is muddy and rough. In our individual lives and in our communal lives, may we allow ourselves to feel and process even the icky stuff. May we remember that boxing our feelings up won't really work, not in the long run. Pretending we are Spider-Man on a skateboard also does not work, nor does pretending we are fast-forwarding. Instead, let us give ourselves the space and time we need to process our emotions so that we might harness them and truly be transformed. The only way out of them, after all, really is to work through them. May it be so. May we make it so.